I will tell you the truth at once, without softening it or decorating it with comforting myths. I am 96 years old, and I am not alive today because I inherited strong genes. I am alive because little by little, year after year, I chose how I would live. I chose what I would eat. I chose how I would move my body. I chose whether fear or discipline would guide my days. When I was a young woman, people in my family used to say that illness ran in our blood like a quiet river. My mother had weak lungs. My older sister developed diabetes before she turned 50. 2 uncles died of heart disease before retirement. In our home, genetics was spoken of as if it were destiny, an invisible script already written long before we took our first breath. I believed that story for many years. Most people still do. But time has a way of revealing what belief alone cannot see. As I watched my relatives suffer, I began to notice something subtle yet powerful. Those who became sick early were not only carrying the same family history as I was, they were also carrying daily habits that quietly shaped their bodies. They ate quickly, slept poorly, worried constantly, and treated movement as if it were optional. At first, I thought these were small things. Later, I realized they were the true architects of health. Science would eventually give names to what I had begun to observe. Doctors started speaking about gene expression, about how the environment inside our bodies could influence which genetic tendencies awaken and which remain silent. They called it epigenetics. I simply called it common sense, born from long experience. A seed may carry the possibility of becoming a towering tree, but whether it thrives or withers depends on soil, sunlight, and care. In the same way, our genes carry possibilities, not guarantees. I learned early that lifestyle is not a dramatic decision made once in a lifetime. It is a quiet negotiation repeated every single day. It is the moment you decide to walk instead of sit. It is the meal you prepare instead of the convenience you accept. It is the way you respond to stress when life inevitably presses against your spirit. These choices may seem too small to matter, yet across decades they accumulate like drops of water carving stone. Now at 96, I wake each morning with a clarity that surprises even my doctors. I do not feel as though I escaped my genetic inheritance. Rather, I feel as though I learned how to guide it. Health, I discovered, is not a lottery ticket you either win or lose at birth. It is a living process shaped continuously by behavior. So if you are listening to me now, wondering whether your family history has already decided your future, I want you to hold on to this thought. Your biology is listening to how you live. Your cells are responding to your habits, and the story of your health is still being written, one ordinary day at a time. The turning point in my life did not arrive with drama. There was no sudden diagnosis, no life-threatening emergency that forced me to change. Instead, it began with a quiet realization in my early 40s. One morning, after climbing a short flight of stairs, I felt an unfamiliar heaviness in my chest. It was not pain, not exactly. It was a message, subtle, undeniable. I remember standing still, holding the railing, and thinking, if I continue to live as I am living, I will become the next chapter in my family's story of illness. That was the first time I consciously understood that health is not simply inherited, it is negotiated. From that day forward, I began to observe my own habits with the curiosity of a scientist and the urgency of someone who had glimpsed her possible future. I noticed how my energy changed after certain meals. I noticed how my thoughts became restless after nights of poor sleep. I noticed how weeks of inactivity quietly stiffened my joints and dulled my mood. These were not abstract theories. They were physiological responses unfolding in real time within my own body. Years later, when research began to confirm the profound influence of lifestyle on gene expression, I felt a deep recognition. Scientists explain that our cells are not passive carriers of genetic code. They are responsive systems, continuously interpreting signals from nutrition, movement, stress hormones, environmental toxins, and even social connection. Certain habits can activate inflammatory pathways, accelerate metabolic dysfunction, and weaken immune resilience. Others can strengthen mitochondrial efficiency, improve insulin sensitivity, and enhance cardiovascular function. What this means in simple human language is this: your genes are listening to how you live. I began with food because food is the most frequent conversation we have with our biology. 3 times a day, sometimes more, we send chemical instructions into our bloodstream. For years, I had eaten as many people do, guided by convenience, emotion, and tradition, rather than awareness. I slowly learned to shift toward meals that nourished rather than merely satisfied, whole grains that sustained my energy instead of causing sudden fatigue, fresh vegetables that seemed to bring a lightness to my digestion, healthy fats that supported my brain rather than clouded my thinking. At first, the changes felt small: a different breakfast, a slightly earlier dinner, more water and fewer sugary drinks. Yet over time, I experienced something remarkable. My body began to respond with consistency. My weight stabilized without extreme effort. My blood pressure, once unpredictable, became steady. I did not feel younger in a magical sense. I felt more aligned, as though my internal systems were cooperating rather than competing. Movement became my second teacher. I was never an athlete, nor did I possess extraordinary strength, but I learned that the human body is designed for regular motion. Walking became my daily ritual, not as punishment, but as partnership. With each step, I felt circulation improve, tension dissolve, and my thoughts settle into clarity. Modern physiology explains this beautifully. Physical activity enhances vascular elasticity, supports glucose metabolism, stimulates neuroplasticity, and reduces chronic inflammation. In other words, movement is not merely exercise. It is communication between muscles, heart, brain, and genes. Stress, however, proved to be the most complex influence of all. Life offered no shortage of challenges: financial uncertainty, personal loss, the endless responsibilities that accompany adulthood. I noticed that during periods of prolonged worry, my sleep fragmented, my digestion weakened, and minor illnesses appeared more frequently. Only later did I understand the hormonal cascade behind these experiences. Chronic activation of stress pathways can elevate cortisol, disrupt immune regulation, and accelerate cellular aging processes. So I began to practice something simple yet transformative: deliberate calm. Not the absence of responsibility, but the presence of perspective. I learned to breathe slowly when confronted with tension. I learned to pause before reacting. I learned to accept that control over circumstances is limited, but control over response is powerful. These internal adjustments gradually reshaped my physiological landscape. Sleep, too, became sacred. In my youth, I treated rest as negotiable, something to sacrifice in pursuit of productivity or entertainment. But as decades passed, I discovered that consistent, restorative sleep is one of the most profound forms of biological repair available to us. During deep sleep, the brain clears metabolic waste, tissues regenerate, and hormonal balance is recalibrated. When I honored this rhythm, I noticed sharper memory, steadier mood, and greater resilience against illness. Perhaps the most surprising lesson came from observing people around me who shared similar genetic risks, yet experienced dramatically different health outcomes. I had a cousin who inherited the same predisposition toward heart disease that haunted our family history. He chose a life of sedentary comfort, rich foods, and persistent anxiety. By 60, he required multiple medications and lived in constant fear of sudden collapse. Another relative, equally at risk, embraced regular physical activity, balanced nutrition, and social engagement. She reached her 80s with vitality that defied expectation. These contrasting lives illustrated a truth more compelling than any scientific paper. Genetics may set the stage, but lifestyle writes the script. By my 70s, doctors began expressing mild astonishment at my clinical results. My cholesterol profile remained favorable. My cognitive function stayed sharp. My mobility allowed me to live independently. They sometimes described me as fortunate. I would smile politely, yet inside I understood that fortune had very little to do with it. What they were witnessing was the cumulative effect of thousands of ordinary decisions made over decades. Now, as I look back from the vantage point of 96 years, I see health not as a fixed trait, but as a dynamic dialogue between inheritance and intention. We cannot erase the genetic patterns passed down to us, but we can influence how loudly they speak. Through nourishment, movement, rest, emotional regulation, and meaningful connection, we continuously adjust the biological environment in which our genes operate. If there is one message I want you to carry forward from this chapter of my life, it is this: lifestyle is not a secondary factor in health. It is the daily language through which your future body is being formed. And whether you realize it or not, you are already speaking that language every single day. By the time I entered my 80s, something very interesting began to happen. People younger than me started asking for advice. At first, I laughed at the idea. I did not feel like a teacher. I felt like a woman who had simply lived carefully. Yet when neighbors my children's age began struggling with chronic fatigue, high blood pressure, joint pain, and persistent anxiety, they would sit with me and ask the same quiet question: how are you still so strong? I would tell them that strength in old age is rarely sudden. It is almost always accumulated. The human body is a remarkable system of adaptation. Every day it responds to signals, mechanical signals from movement, chemical signals from food, electrical signals from thought patterns, hormonal signals from stress or calm. Over time, these signals build a physiological memory. Just as repeated worry can train the nervous system toward hypervigilance, repeated healthy behaviors can train the body toward stability and resilience. Scientists now describe aging not as a single event, but as a gradual shift in cellular efficiency. Mitochondria, the tiny structures responsible for energy production, become less effective when exposed to years of inactivity and poor metabolic regulation. Chronic inflammation, often fueled by excess processed foods and unresolved stress, slowly damages tissues and accelerates degenerative processes. Sleep deprivation disrupts repair cycles. Social isolation weakens emotional regulation and immune competence. But the reverse is also true. Regular physical activity stimulates mitochondrial renewal. Nutrient-dense meals support antioxidant defenses and tissue repair. Restorative sleep maintains neurological integrity. Positive relationships stabilize stress hormones. These influences may sound modest in isolation, yet together they form a powerful biological environment that can slow the visible and invisible aspects of aging. I witnessed this principle repeatedly among my peers. Some individuals treated midlife as a period of inevitable decline. They moved less, not more. They relied increasingly on convenience foods. They assumed that fatigue and discomfort were unavoidable companions of growing older. Their expectations became self-fulfilling. Within a decade, many of them required assistance for tasks they had once performed effortlessly. Others approached aging as a process that demanded adaptation rather than surrender. They modified their routines, choosing gentler forms of exercise but maintaining consistency. They refined their diets, prioritizing quality over indulgence. They learned new skills, keeping their minds flexible. Their aging was not free from challenge, yet it unfolded with dignity and functional independence. One of my closest friends, Margaret, provides a vivid example. We shared similar genetic backgrounds and both experienced early signs of metabolic imbalance in our 50s. Margaret decided to transform her lifestyle with remarkable dedication. She joined community walking groups, experimented with plant-rich cooking, and practiced relaxation techniques each evening. Over time, her laboratory results improved dramatically. More importantly, her sense of vitality returned. She described feeling as though she had reintroduced cooperation within her own body. Another acquaintance, facing the same predispositions, chose denial. He resisted change, believing that medical intervention alone would safeguard his future. Medication became his primary strategy, while underlying habits remained unchanged. By his late 70s, his mobility was severely limited, and his emotional outlook had grown pessimistic. Observing these contrasting trajectories deepened my conviction that lifestyle is not merely preventive, it is formative. As the decades progressed, I also discovered that mental habits are as influential as physical ones. Chronic resentment, fear, and hopelessness create physiological tension that quietly burdens the cardiovascular and immune systems. Conversely, cultivating gratitude, purpose, and emotional flexibility can stabilize neurochemical balance. I am not suggesting that positive thinking is a cure for disease. Rather, I am acknowledging that psychological states contribute measurable biological effects. The mind and body are not separate territories. They are intertwined expressions of one living organism. Late in life, adaptation became even more essential. I could no longer move with the speed or endurance of youth. Instead of abandoning activity, I adjusted its intensity. Gentle stretching replaced strenuous exertion. Short, frequent walks replaced long excursions. I prioritized balance training to reduce fall risk. These modifications allowed me to maintain independence without unrealistic expectations. Aging, I realized, rewards those who evolve their habits rather than cling to outdated standards. Nutrition, too, required refinement. My appetite naturally decreased, making food quality more critical than ever. I focused on meals that delivered concentrated nourishment, colorful vegetables, modest portions of protein, whole grains that sustained energy without digestive strain. Hydration became deliberate rather than incidental. These choices supported cognitive clarity and physical comfort well into my 90s. Perhaps the most profound realization emerged when I began reflecting on time itself. Health is often discussed in terms of immediate outcomes, weight loss within weeks, improved laboratory markers within months. Yet the true influence of lifestyle reveals itself across decades. Each constructive choice compounds like interest in a well-managed account. Conversely, neglect accumulates its own invisible debt. From the vantage point of 96 years, I see my life as a long conversation with biology. Genetics provided the opening statement, outlining potential strengths and vulnerabilities. Lifestyle supplied the response, a continuous series of adjustments that gradually reshape the narrative. So when people ask whether it is ever too late to change, I answer with gentle certainty. As long as the body is alive, it retains some capacity for adaptation. Improvements may occur more slowly with age, but they remain meaningful. Even modest adjustments can enhance comfort, mobility, and mental clarity. Your future self is being constructed not in dramatic moments, but in quiet repetitions. Every nourishing meal, every restorative night of sleep, every deliberate step, and every moment of emotional balance contributes to a physiological legacy. Over time, these choices can transform vulnerability into resilience. And resilience, I have learned, is the true measure of a long and fulfilling life. If you remember nothing else from my long life, remember this simple truth. Your body is not a fixed story written only by the past. It is a living manuscript, revised each day by how you choose to live. I did not reach 96 because I was fearless or extraordinary. I arrived here because I learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that health responds to attention. It responds to patience. It responds to consistent care. When I look back across the decades, I do not see a perfect path. I see seasons of doubt, periods of fatigue, moments when discipline felt heavy and change seemed inconvenient. Yet each time I returned to small, constructive habits, my body answered with subtle improvements: a steadier heartbeat, a clearer morning mind, the quiet confidence that comes from feeling capable within one's own skin. These were not miracles. They were biological consequences of repeated choices. Genetics, of course, remain part of my story. I never pretended otherwise. There were years when medical tests revealed risks I could not ignore. There were mornings when my joints reminded me of inherited fragility. But instead of surrendering to inevitability, I treated these signals as guidance. I adjusted my routines. I listened more closely. I respected the delicate conversation between what I had been given at birth and what I could still influence through action. Many people believe that transformation requires dramatic effort. In truth, the most profound changes often grow from ordinary discipline. Drinking water before thirst becomes urgent, choosing movement before stiffness becomes permanent, allowing the mind to rest before anxiety becomes habitual. These are quiet decisions, almost invisible in the moment, yet across years they shape the landscape of aging with surprising precision. There is also a deeper psychological freedom in understanding that lifestyle matters. When you realize that your future health is not entirely dictated by ancestry, you reclaim a sense of authorship. Fear begins to loosen its grip. Responsibility replaces resignation. Instead of asking, "What will happen to me?" you begin asking, "What can I influence today?" This shift alone can transform how you experience the passage of time. Now, in the gentle twilight of my life, I do not measure success by the number of birthdays I have celebrated. I measure it by the quality of the days I am still able to live. I can walk unassisted. I can hold meaningful conversations. I can feel gratitude for simple moments of sunlight and laughter. These gifts are not accidental. They are the harvest of habits planted long ago. So if you are standing at the beginning or the middle of your own journey, uncertain about the weight of your genetic inheritance, I offer you my story as evidence of possibility. You do not need to control everything to change something. You do not need perfect conditions to begin improving your biological future. You only need the willingness to act again and again in ways that support life rather than diminish it. Your genes may whisper suggestions about who you might become, but your lifestyle speaks louder. It shapes the environment in which those genetic whispers are either amplified or softened. Over time, this dialogue determines not only how long you live, but how fully you experience the years you are given. Take care of the small things. Trust in the slow power of consistency. And remember that even the longest life is ultimately built from the quiet courage of daily choices.